Welcome to The Point. We're going through evolution at the moment. Please stay with us for 26 minutes. We're going to talk. This is number 7 in a series called The Overview of Evolution. I feel very strongly about evolution because our children and our young people are taught about evolution as a fact in schools and universities. And basically, it's an atheist belief, a humanist belief, which basically cuts God out completely. The Bible is very clear. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And as far as we're concerned, God said, let us make man in our image. In the image of God created he, male and female. In the New Testament, it says, in the beginning was the Word, that's Jesus Christ. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made by him. Without him, nothing was made that was made. But in 1859, let's look at the next picture, which is Charles Darwin, image 65b. Charles Darwin came up with an alternative to the Bible, which is basically everything happened by chance. Early life forms evolved in the primordial slime, but somewhere around 3.5 to 3.75 billion years ago. And from these simple life forms, other life forms evolved. He wrote a book, next picture, 65c, The Origin of Species. There's his book. And I want to read, this is slightly repeating last time, but it is so important. I want you to know what evolutionists actually teach. This is Charles Darwin in his book, The Origin of Species. Charles Darwin says in his book, there is grandeur in this view of life with its several powers having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one. And that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. Well, that's his opinion. Had he got electron microscopes, as we have today, I don't think he would talk about simple life forms, because very simply, there are no simple life forms. For one thing, I've only predominantly talked about DNA in the last few series. But all living forms, whether they're plants, animals, birds, insects, and humans, we've all got DNA. Humans have got 100 trillion cells, and every single cell has a genetic code, which is the most complex genetic code in the universe, and far, far more powerful than all the NASA supercomputers. So Charles Darwin, when he writes about from so simple a beginning, uses from so simple a beginning, to me is absolute rubbish. And I say, if he had an electron microscope, he would never talk about a simple life form. Here's a picture in image number 66 of DNA. And that DNA is the genetic code which God used to create all living structures. Now, evolutionists keep repeating that complex life evolved from simple life forms such as unicellular organisms. That's organisms with one cell. And the last program, I talked about an amoeba, which is an organism with one cell. And let's look at a picture in image 67 of an amoeba. That is a unicellular organism, has one cell. But it's not a simple life form. It contains DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid in it, the most complex genetic code in the universe. And guess how much DNA it's got? It's got 200 times more DNA in it than a human cell. We have human cells, eye cells, heart cells, lung cells. Well, one amoeba has 200 times as much DNA in it as a human cell. So I'm sorry, I will not accept that an amoeba is a simple life form. It may look simple, but it's not. No life form is simple. So basically, if an amoeba has 200 times as much DNA as a human cell, then it's arguably 200 times more complicated. You can make up your own mind on that one. So please don't listen to anyone who talks about simple life forms. There are no such things as simple life forms. It's absolute rubbish to talk about simple life forms. Simple life forms only exist in the imagination of evolutionists and humanists who reject creation and all supernatural activity by God completely. The truth is the whole universe, the sun, the planets, the earth, all vegetation and all living animals, birds, fish and humans are all totally supernatural. Everything is supernatural. It's all supernaturally designed, all of it. There is no such thing as a natural world. I know there's a museum in London called the Natural History Museum. I think it's incorrectly named. It should be called the Supernatural History Museum because everything we see around us is supernaturally designed by God. Let's look at the next picture, image 68. That's a cell wall. That's an idealized image, a drawing of a cell wall. Now, that is not simple. I'm not going to go into details of exactly what a cell wall does. It's biochemically very complicated, anatomically very complicated. It is a totally complicated structure. And that is a cell wall of a very, very simple, what they would call a lowly life form. That's the cell wall of a bacteria. Now, a bacteria actually is not simple. It's very complicated. And that is the cell wall of a bacteria. Evolutionists believe that the specialized manufacture of all other cells within all living organisms, all spontaneously generated, independently, simultaneously, and all by chance. So what they're actually saying is that all the different cells, they all simultaneously generated all together by chance, including, for example, in the case of humans, skin cells, muscle cells, blood cells, brain cells, eye cells, liver cells, kidney cells, bone cells, and reproductive cells. And that's just a few of the many. But my point is that all of these cells are totally interdependent on other cells. For example, you've got an eye that lives in your orbit, but your eye moves around. It actually scans. You're scanning the television, believe it or not, about 3 million times a second, because the muscles of your eyes are moving your eye across the television screen about 3 million times a second. It's no good having an eye without all the muscles to scan across the television screen. And it's no good having an eye without an oxygen supply and an orbit, which is part of the skeletal system, because the eye has to focus, and your head and my head, it moves around. We are balancing. I'm sitting on a chair and I'm balancing because I'm not aware of it, but I have a cerebral cortex, which does some thinking. But below my cerebral cortex is the cerebellum, which does all the breathing and the movement and the balancing and keeping the heart right, the heart rate correct, and the blood pressure correct, and the carbon dioxide level correct, and the insulin level correct, and lots more besides. But we don't even think about it. It is all supernatural. Now, the cells that had this is the evolutionist speaking again. The cells that had spontaneously generated could spontaneously communicate with each other purely by chance. And the ability of all living organisms to manufacture, replicate, and repair highly specialized cells also arose by chance. Last program, we looked at Spitfires, and we saw that crashed aeroplanes can't mend themselves. Well, not all, but most of the cells in our bodies can mend themselves. That's a quality which God has built into the genome, if you like, into the genes of all of our cells, that they can, if they're damaged, they can mend themselves. Now, the evolutionists want us to believe that all happened by chance. Well, can you imagine how complicated it would be to just put it something simple. How complicated would it be to make a computer code so that a crashed aeroplane repaired itself? Well, that would be complicated, but a Spitfire is really simple compared with a heart cell or a lung cell or a brain cell. So I know these evolutionists keep on talking about things that all happen by chance. I think it's absolute rubbish. That's what I think. Let's now look at the eye. This is image 68A, another picture of Charles Darwin, and this is what Charles Darwin actually wrote about the human eye. This is what he actually said. To suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for emitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I confess, absurd in the highest degree. The difficulty of believing that a perfect and complex eye could be formed by natural selection, though insuperable by our imagination, should not be considered subversive of the theory. That's Charles Darwin speaking, and definitely not me speaking. So let's look at the human eye and come back to what Charles Darwin said. Just take up just one thing he said, actually. He said, to suppose that this eye, everything happened by chance, seems, I confess, absurd in the highest degree. That's what Charles Darwin said. Actually, I agree with him. It does seem absurd in the highest degree. So let's look at the human eye. Let's look at the next slide, which is number 69. Basically, your eyes are very sophisticated cameras, far more complex than... right now, I'm looking at a very expensive camera in a television studio belonging to Revelation TV, and they are very, very complex cameras, these, and very expensive too. But an eye is far, far more complicated than any television camera. Let's move on now and to the next slide, which is number 70, to see basically how the eye works. I'm not going to take you through detailed anatomy and biochemistry and physiology. Basically, all you need to know simply is that light is made of photons, which are subatomic particles moving in a waveform. And on the left side of that picture, photons or light come through transparent skin, known as your conjunctiva. That's the only part of your anatomy where you have transparent skin. So the light comes through there, and the amount of light emitted to the back of the eye is controlled by the iris, which is a circular muscle. You're familiar with the iris. We have different colored irises. I've got a blue one. A lot of people have brown ones, and some people have green ones. All very attractive. God made us the way he made us. But the thing is that those little irises, they contract down, just like a camera, by the way, and as it becomes darker, so they dilate, and as it becomes brighter, they contract. Otherwise, there'll be too much light, too many photons let into the back of the eye. Now, what happens then is you can see a lens there. Well, all those photons, those light waves, are basically accommodated or from parallel waves into waves which converge on the retina, which is the yellow image at the back of the eye. Now, depending on where we're looking, the lens has to become more or less squashy. The more round it becomes, like that, the more the parallel waves are converged to the back of the eye. But and as the ciliary muscles contract, the muscles which are around the lens, the muscles, the light rays are not converged as much. Basically, it's accommodation so that you can look at near things and distant things, and you can still get the actual image on the back of your eye. In the back of your eye, you have you have specialized cells. Let's look at, before we come to them, let's look at the next picture, image number 71. Just like your car, your eye has got windscreen washers. You've got special fluid, which comes from the inside of the eye. It's called the inner canthus, and then moves across the eye. Sorry, I got that wrong. The eye, forgive me, it drains from the inner canthus. It is produced from all over the eye. And every now and again, the windscreen wipers, they close like that and give they sort of wipe the eye clean. Sometimes you might get a bit of dust in your eye. You know it's very, very painful. Anyway, we've got windscreen washers because it's very important to keep that lens clear. So light is converged by the curvature of the lens and the cornea to form an image on the retina. Let's look at the next picture, which is number 72, an image of a bicycle. So the light rays from the bicycle are converged by the lens and the cornea to an upside-down bicycle on the back of the eye at the rods and the cones of the retina. Now, these rods and cones are very, very specialized cells. The rods and the cones of the retina can distinguish about 10 million colors. 10 million of them. Now, the retina converts light into electronic impulses which are transmitted to the visual cortex via the optic nerves. Let's look at the next picture. That's image number 73. There's a man looking at a car, and the image of the car upside down on his retina is converted into electrical impulses which are passed off the optic nerves to the visual cortexes. The visual cortex, or visual centers, part of the brain. And how do they do it? Well, let's look at the next picture, image 74. There's the retina, the back of your eye. When a doctor looks using his special ophthalmoscope, I was a doctor for nearly 30 years and got familiar with using an ophthalmoscope. As you look into somebody's eye, this is actually what you see. You see a lot of blood vessels, and you can tell a great deal about the health of an individual simply by looking at the blood vessels at the back of the eye. It's one of the few places you can actually see blood vessels without doing an invasive procedure. But there you can also see the optic nerve, which is taking electrical impulses from the rods and the cones to the brain. Let's now look at the next picture, image number 75, which is the specialized rods and cones. Those have been dyed, so you can make out the difference between them, but they are really, really complicated. I once did a conference and spent half an hour explaining, or trying to explain, how electrical impulses are created out of photons. I basically explained a whole lot of chemistry that went on, or biochemistry it would be really. Huge number of permutations and combinations of different chemical processes are going on in order to make photons or light waves into electrical impulses. Now, let's move the next picture, which is number 76, and these are the actual retina cells. Again, the rods and the cones. You can see how complicated they are, because each single retina cell has to have its own blood supply, it's got to have its own nerve supply, and it's got to be exactly the right place to get exactly the right light images and convert them into electrical energy. Let's look at the next picture, which is number 77, the visual system. The image is processed by the retina at the back of the eye into these electrical impulses, which are transmitted to the visual cortex at the back of the brain. You can see that in the visual system. Now, actually, even the movement of the electrical impulses along a nerve is a very, very complex process in itself. I'll be talking about the nervous system in another program, but it is very, very complicated. It's to do with an electrical impulse passing along the nerve, and involves different elements moving in and out of cells in order that the electrical impulse may pass along the nerve. And the electrical impulse eventually arrives at the next picture, which is number 78, which is a neuron, which is a brain cell. And each neuron is itself basically a miracle. Each of those neurons is connected to about 10,000 other neurons. So the visual cortex then communicates with the rest of the brain, so that we all know exactly where we are in time and space. Let's look at the next picture. That's the human brain, number 79. Now, all of the above is actually, I've just taken you through all that in about 5 minutes, is a very, very simplified model of eyesight, which we all use every moment of our waking lives without even thinking about it. But I'm hoping you're getting the idea that this is really, really complicated. Let's look what the evolutionists have to say about this. This is image 79A. The evolutionists say, well, by chance, if you look at the top, 79A, the skin became transparent, and then a lens formed, an orbit formed, and so it goes on. In fact, I'm not going to go through exactly what they believe, because it is absolutely ridiculous to think this all happened by chance. They say the cells of the cornea miraculously became transparent, permitting the passage of light purely by chance. Simultaneously, highly sophisticated rods and cones developed within the retinas of the eyes of all living organisms purely by chance. These rods and cones spontaneously developed the ability to encode light into electrical impulses, which then traveled along the self-manufactured optic nerves, which also arose spontaneously and simultaneously and purely by chance. Highly sophisticated cells within the cerebral cortex simultaneously spontaneously developed, and these highly specialized self-generating cells of the cerebral cortex could interpret these electrical impulses and convert these electrical signals into stereoscopic sight purely by chance. The stereoscopic sight could then be interpreted by other self-generating, highly sophisticated brain cells of the cerebral cortex in a highly developed independent function called thought and subconscious awareness. We've got to the end of this program. I'm going to have to come back to this. I hope you're getting the message that evolution is ridiculous. What I have talked about is irreducible complexity. There wasn't a chance for evolution to have a try. It had to be bang on perfect, first time right, otherwise you can't see. What we're talking is a supernatural eye with supernatural brain, supernatural nerves, supernatural rods and cones, supernatural everything, and I reject totally the idea that it all happened by chance. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life, and even Charles Darwin said it's absurd. So I'm going to return to this in the next program. I do hope you're enjoying these. Please send any feedback. We'd love to hear from you to info@Revelation TV. There's more information on my website, which is freechristianteaching.org. And do keep coming back regularly to get more information from this program. To the Point, which is very to the point, very short, very to the point, all about a God, a supernatural, super intelligent God of the universe. Thanks so much for listening to us, and we'd love to have you on the program. You are very special to us. You're the viewers. Revelation TV is all about our viewers, and I hope you feel special because you are special. God bless you, and see you again soon.